What's going on, everybody, and welcome to WNBA Hoop Streams presented by Google. 27th year of the WNBA is set to kick off, and we've got you covered the next 30 minutes alongside Terrika Foster-Brasby. I'm Sam Ravech. We will hear from Lyles Jr. later on in the show, talking all things hoops. But before we get into it, Terrika, I got to ask you, scale of 1 to 10, your level of excitement heading into this season is?
10,000.
10,000. We'll take it. Well, we had a lot of changes, too, over the WNBA, over the offseason. A lot of different teams making some different moves. But one thing that did not change is the fact that the Las Vegas Aces are still WNBA champions. It's amazing to think, right? Their first title in franchise history. But some news did just break on Tuesday. The WNBA did announce that they rescinded the Aces' 2025 first-round draft pick for violating league rules regarding impermissible player benefits. Becky Hammon, their head coach, is also suspended for 2 games. So what does it mean for this team now, coming off that title run, having to start the year like this?
It's crazy, Sam. Honestly, it's really disappointing, right? Because you talk about this team, and as you mentioned, this team is coming off the highs of a championship, an incredible parade. It's their first. Not only is it their first championship in franchise history, but they just relocated to Las Vegas 5 years ago. So you got a title in 5 years. You just opened a brand new practice facility, the first of its kind, the only WNBA team to have this kind of facility specifically for the Aces. And then to have this come right after it, it's a black spot, right? It's a black spot for the league. It's a black spot for the team. It's a black spot for the marketing. Nobody wants this to happen. But most importantly, I think that we just have to keep player protection top of mind. You know, regardless of all the other things, player protection has to be top of mind, especially when it comes to a player's physical and mental health. So, you know, I hope that we finally get to a point where this kind of thing doesn't happen ever again. This kind of scenario doesn't have to happen ever again. And that we do, you know, can finally say, hey, listen, when we make mistakes, when we say things out of turn, or when someone feels that our impact is different than our intentions, we can own it, acknowledge it, and move forward from it.
All right, but on the floor for the Aces, they made it clear that they are trying to run it back for a second title by bringing in two-time MVP Candace Parker. So what does the dynamic of this team now change to with having a player of her caliber on it?
Wow, this team brought back their core group, right? And this was already a team that was having a little bit of struggle inside when it comes to their rebounding. But you know what you just did? You have just added the 2020 Defensive Player of the Year to your team. So you've added another rebounder. You've added someone who's going to provide you all the protection you need at the rim. She has over 600 career blocks, placing her 5th all-time in the WNBA, and she's still going to attract attention on the offensive side of the ball. And so this team has just absolutely gotten better, hands down, on all sides. And let's not forget they added Alicia Clark, too. So, I mean, can the juggernaut get any bigger?
That's a good question. Again, trying to become the first team to repeat as WNBA champion since the LA Sparks did so back in 2001 and 2002. Last question for you on the Aces before we move on. I know we got a lot to get to.
Yeah.
Last year, they didn't have any trouble scoring the ball, right? They scored over 90 points per game. They were one of the best offenses in the league. Where they did struggle at times was on the boards, and they also struggled three-point defense percentage-wise, was another area of concern. So not only does Candace Parker provide maybe some help on the rebounding side, but I got to imagine she helps on the leadership front as well.
Oh, absolutely. The one thing that you cannot be short of if any WNBA team is a voice for you. And what I love most about this is that Candace knows her role, right? She's been in this league long enough. She's led teams long enough. So she knows her role. She knows that this is A'ja Wilson's team. She knows that her role on this team is not to be the focal point, but she absolutely will provide some additional leadership, some additional veteran presence. She's going to floss a little bit of what she knows. So I imagine that this is just awesome, especially given the fact that they're now going to be starting the season without their head coach for 2 games. This is that additional piece and that additional leadership that you absolutely need to make sure you remain on track.
All right, so that's the Aces. We'll get more on them later on in the show. Let's take it back a week in the preseason because we had some exciting stuff going on. The WNBA played a game on Canadian soil for the first time in league history.
Yes.
And Canada showed out. And I mean 20,000 strong in Scotiabank Arena to see Minnesota and Chicago square off. I mean, Terrika, this certainly opens up at least the conversation of expansion.
Absolutely it does. And you know, I was in Toronto leading up to this particular game. I didn't get a chance to stay for the game, but the excitement around basketball at this level in this country, in this city, it was exciting. There was marketing everywhere. Merchandise was gone. I saw people walking around in WNBA hoodies. Like, I loved it. And I think what this just does is it puts Toronto to the top of the list when it comes to this expansion conversation. I mean, we've heard Portland, we've heard Oakland, we've heard that there's some investors that are trying to get a group in Philadelphia. I've heard that, you know, there's something happening in Tennessee and Memphis. And according to Kathy Engelbert, there are a few other cities that have expressed interest in that the league is looking at when it comes to expansion. But I think what you've done with this game is that you've given them a model, right? They have now had a chance to see and experience WNBA in Canada. So it's kind of hard to not have them at the top of your list at this point.
Right. So we talked about some new teams, talked about some new faces as well. Let's talk about some of the new rules that are going to be coming to the WNBA this season. It's really a couple of them, Terrika. I want to run through them really quickly and we'll get your thoughts on it.
Sure.
It's headlined by the Coaches Challenge. So each team is going to be awarded a challenge at the start of a game. Coaches get one per game. Doesn't matter if you win it or if you lose it, you only get one. We've also got the transition take fouls. NBA implemented them recently. In short, they're kind of stiffer penalties for players who commit or stop advantageous situations for the offensive player, making a play without the ball, essentially. And then you got bench conduct down there as well. And that's kind of, you want players to stay close to the bench, and you also can't really be saying things from the bench to players who are on the floor. But what do you make of some of these rule changes, Terrika?
Totally good with majority of the rules that are there. Wish the Coaches Challenge would be a little bit more in terms of, instead of just one and that's it, if I am successful in my challenge, I should be able to retain my challenge and use it a bit more. And as far as bench conduct, y'all just be lit on the bench. Just be lit anyway. Forget it.
All right, so we got new teams, we got new faces, and we got new games because this is the start of the WNBA season, and we are all fired up. You can also tell in the studio, we're ready to go. I mean, season number 27, lots of intriguing storylines. We're going to watch them all the way through, and it's all headlined there, 11 Eastern time. You got the Mercury and the Sparks out west. All right, now it's time to take a look at what fans are searching for, presented by Google. And the fans have spoken, Terrika. The Phoenix Mercury were the top trending WNBA team in the United States this week. Obviously know the reason why. I was probably one of the millions to search them. I'm sure you were as well. Brittney Griner back in the fold with Diana Taurasi. What do you make of the Phoenix Mercury this year? And maybe what is their ceiling now with BG back?
Yeah, you know, this team is one that I think is going to cause a lot of intrigue. Because there are just so many people who don't know what to expect from them. And let's, you know, if we're being completely fair, this team is a team that had so much tension built up around them last season. They had so many clouds hanging over their head. And I think that was, you know, not only from the fact of BG being missing, but if you can recall, there were moments where, you know, their stars, DT and Skylar, were getting into it and having disagreements. And it was Vanessa Nygar's first year coaching that team. So really, it was just a confusing year for a lot of people, but specifically with the Phoenix Mercury. This year, you don't have that, right? You don't have that cloud hanging over you. BG is back. No, she's not going to be 2021 BG instantly, but I think just the fact that she's so happy to be back that as soon as she touched ground, first thing that BG did was put on her shoes and dunk a basketball. So that let you know right now she was committed and dedicated to getting back to being on the court. I think the fans are just interested in seeing what that means.
Well, what does that mean? And now she is back. I'm sure it might take a little bit of time to get her back in the fold, but remind fans of exactly what type of player in person she is.
I mean, well, first off, BG is what we all call in this league a gentle giant, because as tall as she is and as much body as she brings to the court, she's really one of the sweetest people that you could ever meet. So it was very, very felt across the league in her absence last season. But what you're getting now is someone who is absolutely going to be able to dominate the paint. When BG is on the court, she provides that catch that everyone knows that they're going to have to build bodies around her and bring people around to cover her, because she's going to dominate everything inside. Her rebounding ability, her ability to put the ball in the glass, it is uncanny and unlike any other. Again, getting back into shape, getting back into the space where you can feel comfortable being dominant, that's something that we're just going to have to give her time to do. And I think she's going to figure it out, absolutely. We just don't know if that's going to be at the beginning of the year or if it's going to be closer towards the end of the season.
Either way, having BG back makes this team a whole lot more dynamic in an already very difficult Western Conference. We talked about how the East may be broken up a little bit this year. The West, I mean, you got to run the gauntlet to try and get through the West this year, right?
You do. You got to feel very, very difficult or very, very different about looking at the West side of the WNBA than you have in the past. LA is going to be a lot different this year. They've got a new head coach. They've got a lot of pieces, have brought in some veteran players to help build that chemistry. Nneka's there, Chiney's there. Love the addition of De'Erica Hamby. Love the way that they're going to get Lexi Brown more involved. So there's that. You still have to account for Seattle. Don't let anybody fool you and tell you that Seattle is just out of it now because they no longer have Breanna Stewart as Sue Bird. Absolutely not. As long as Noelle Quinn is coaching that team, she's going to have them ready. And hello, the Gold Mamba. Have you heard of her? The Gold Mamba. So yeah, definitely going to look out for some trouble in the West.
That's what to look for in the West this year. Oftentimes, basketball feels like it's more than just a game. Well, WNBA champ A'ja Wilson knows all about it.
Yeah, this league is a sisterhood. It's way more than just a game. It's an empire. A fearless empire. More side-swiping steals? Check. We got hoops, drive, and passion. Easy. More buckets, extra sauce? Order up. More dimension-defying dimes, more dancing than a Saturday night. Now this is what I call prime time. You see that?
All right, time now to welcome in our good friend Harry Lyles Jr. You can catch him on Around the Horn as well as other various ESPN sites. And Harry, we got a lot of interesting things to talk about. You're going to be with us the remainder of the show. And I figured we'd start here with the conversation surrounding super teams, because I feel like if we created a word cloud about the WNBA offseason, the most pronounced word in that cloud would be super teams. So what we tried to do, what we did do, is compile a list of the top 5 WNBA super teams in history. And here are those teams. You talk about eras as well. 97 to 2000, nobody was better than the Comets. Seattle was great in 22, as well as previous couple of years, 16, 17. Nobody was beating the Sparks. Minnesota Lynx won 4 titles in 6 years, and the Detroit Shock was a little bit of a homer guess there for Terrika as well. But Harry, I got to go to you here. 2016 Sparks, what do we got on them? Because we decided to go with them as number 5 in our list.
Yeah, and that's where I've got them as well. I mean, you talk about a team that is absolutely talented. You've still got Candace Parker at her peak. Nneka Ogwumike, that MVP season that she had, nobody was playing better basketball than her that year. And their title that they won was incredibly timed. They had beaten a Lynx team that at that point was another super team that we will be talking about here, as you guys saw on our list, that I thought was incredibly impressive. They never were able to repeat, and this Sparks team was a big reason why, because they were just that good.
Yeah, no question about it. And Terrika, coming off the bench there, too, you had Lavender. She was averaging double figures. I mean, this was also a team that had young Chelsea Gray on it as well.
Yes, this was a team that was dynamic on the court, on the bench, and in their starting 5. And let's also remember this. This team had a little additional motivation from Candace Parker, because in 2016, unfortunately, that was the year that our beloved in women's basketball coach Pat Summitt passed away. And I feel like everybody built a little bit of extra something in that season for Pat. And Candace absolutely played lights out that entire postseason.
All right, so we got the Sparks at number 5. Let's go on to number 4. And here we went with a team relatively recently out in the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle Storm. Harry, what do we got on the 2022 Storm?
I like that. I like this era. 2 titles, 2018 and 2020 as well. And I believe as well, they went 6-0 in their finals games. They beat both the Mystics and the Aces, respectively. The only reason I don't have them higher is because Sue Bird, a little bit towards the further end of her career at this point, if she was a little bit younger and you had Breanna Stewart in there as well, I think this could have been one of the most dominant teams of all time. But there's no doubt that when they were playing in the past few years here, that they were an absolute problem across this league.
Yeah, lost in the semifinals last year to the Aces. But again, like Harry was saying, Terrika, this team constructed is maybe one of the better rosters that we've seen in a long time in the league.
Yeah, and let's keep this in perspective, too. So for like everyone out there watching, we weren't saying that they're the most dominant team in the league in 2022. Clearly, we know who the champions were. But when Tina Charles made that decision to leave Phoenix, which was very controversial, but when she made that decision to leave Phoenix and she went over to Seattle, we were like, whoa, Seattle just got really dangerous really quickly. And I kind of wish we had longer series in the postseason, because when Tina Charles made that move, there was something about that Seattle team that really brought out the fire. She fit in. Breanna Stewart played amazing in the 2022 season. Sue Bird shot the lights out the gym. And that semifinals, I think, is probably one of the best semifinal matchups that I had ever seen in women's basketball, period. So kind of wish we had a 7-game series with that one so we can get a little bit more time in there.
All right, so that's what we got. We go on to number 3 now. So we're going 5-4-3. And the Detroit Shock. This is an awfully familiar team to you, Terrika. Let's start with you.
It is. And you know what? I'm waiting for all of y'all to blow my mentions up about this team, because at the end of the day, Detroit went from worst to first, okay? They were the worst team in the league in 2002, and they quickly turned that around in 2003. Katie Smith, Tweety Nolan. I should have wore my Tweety Nolan jersey today. One of the best shooting guards that people don't talk about as much. Something about Detroit teams, even when you look on the NBA side in 2004, they were a team that won a championship off their grit, off their defense. Same thing with this 2003 team.
Harry, anything on the Shock in the early 2000s?
Yo, seeing those highlights, man, the nostalgia hits. It really does. And for their title that they won in 2003, you beat a Sparks team that was really the only team that could hang with you that year, and it was one of Lisa Leslie's best years. I think that was one of her best seasons that she had, both scoring and rebounding wise. And Detroit, it was still all them. But we keep talking about, you guys talked about it earlier, expansion in the show and things like that. If we could bring the Detroit Shock back, I think we would all probably enjoy that.
Harry, you are speaking my language, man. 3 titles in 5 years. Show us some respect, okay?
All right, let's move on. We're down to the final 2 teams here. This was a tough one, but we went with the Minnesota Lynx. And again, you look at the 2018 roster here. This was a roster that was, here, quite frankly, for the last couple of years too, Harry. This team won 4 titles in 6 years. It was a really, really impressive stretch.
Yeah, Sam, you said it right there. 4 titles in 6 years. This team, and look, I am a little bit biased here because of one, Maya Moore. There are 2 basketball players over the last, I would say, 25 years in Metro Atlanta that you talk about how great they were in high school. One is Lou Williams. The other one is Maya Moore. She is one of the best basketball players, men's or women's game, of all time. And that doesn't even start touching her off the court accolades. But this Lynx team was in it every single year. And they dominated so much that even in 2018, when they went 18-16, it still looked like, hey, they still might have a shot at this. So to me, they're close, but it's also appropriate that they're number 2 here.
You agree, Terrika?
Oh, God, it wasn't even fair. It wasn't fair to the rest of the league, the way that team was constructed. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe when we got around the 2018 era, at least 4 of those players were approaching 30, if not, a little over. Right. So don't tell us the old people can't play. They were balling out, and I completely agree, Harry.
We're talking old people. I don't know. We're going all the way back now to 97. Let's go to the comments. 4 straight titles. Cheryl Swoops. This team was Tina Thompson. This was an impressive team. When you go all the way back there, you want to see highlights, Harry. Look at these highlights.
Hey, you talk about nostalgia with the Shock. If you don't feel it with the comments, something's wrong with you. Look, Cynthia Cooper, Tina Thompson, Cheryl Swoops, as a young basketball fan growing up, seeing all this takes me back to a very, very specific place. And the thing to me that puts them at number 1 over the Lynx is because they won 4 in a row. It's hard enough to go back to back, clearly, because we know how great those Lynx teams were, winning 4 out of 6. To win 4 in a row, to me, is absolutely absurd. And it's easy to put them at number 1 because of that.
Terrika?
There is literally no team that I can think could be greater than the Comets in that time sprint. They set the tone for what this league could eventually turn into, and what it eventually did turn into. And even now, when you look at how much these women still continue to give to the game in terms of coaching on, a collegiate level, calling games, being in front offices now, there are so many. They're so ingrained into the way that the WNBA is constructed, and the way that it has, grown and evolved. And I fell in love with basketball watching the 1997 Comets, and that love has only grown. So
Well, those are a couple of the teams that were in the past as far as super teams. We got a couple forming in the current WNBA right now. One in the Big Apple in the New York Liberty, and the other out in the desert with the Las Vegas Aces. So, Harry, you talk about the next 5-10 years. You look at these two teams, somewhat of an arms battle here. Who is going to win more titles? Will it be New York or Vegas?
Guys, is it cheating if I say Vegas? I know they won last year, and they're my pick to repeat this year, but I still feel like they've got a lot more work to do. I think A'ja Wilson is going to get better this year, especially when you add Candace Parker in. It might be her last year, but I think A'ja's going to be able to learn a lot from her as a veteran, and Candace might be the person to keep them on their toes and be like, hey, you guys won last year. This is a new year. It's what have you done for me lately? And so I think that she's really going to invigorate this team and hopefully keep them going in a way where we see our next dynasty.
Yeah, Terrika, outside of what Candace Parker provides on the floor, which we all know is excellent, what she can provide in the leadership department, I got to imagine, is just tremendous as well.
Yeah, you know, I was kind of hoping that Harry would say the Liberty, right? So that, like, I could argue against you or something. I wanted to bring it around the horn feel here. But no, like, I agree with you completely that it is absolutely, in my opinion, I think it will absolutely be the Aces. And really, it's just about, you know, the people who make these teams super teams, right? When you think about the way that the Liberty is constructed, the contract set up, the way that they literally brought in different pieces to construct this team versus the way the Aces is set up, that core group has kind of been that core group for a while. So I didn't look at them as, you know, players that were kind of manufactured in to make this team. They were already this team. Adding Candace Parker and Alicia Clark were just like icing on a cake that was already amazing to begin with. So I feel just from a perspective of longevity, of youth, of the way that the contracts were set up, that this team was just kind of set up for a longer-term success than what the New York Liberty may be set up for.
Yeah, certainly could be a preview of the 2023 WNBA Finals. But before we get all the way to the finals, we got to start the season, and that's exactly what's going to happen over the course of this weekend. Any games you're going to be having an eye on here, Terrika?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to see Mercury Sparks. I just can't wait to see BG back in action, formally and officially for the first time ever. So I'm going to be looking out for that one.
All right, switching gears here now. It's very early on, and in fact, the season is just getting underway, but it's never too early on this show to predict some individual awards as well as some team awards. We love to pontificate here. That's exactly what we do. So having said that, let's go ahead and start with the big one here, Harry. Who will be the 2023 WNBA MVP?
I'm going with A'ja Wilson, going for number 3, one of the few people that could actually pull that off in WNBA history. She shot 50% from the field for the first time in her career last year. She's been consistent, and honestly, again, I mentioned this earlier, I really feel like being around Candace Parker and being able to pick a legend's brain like that is going to help her get even better quicker. And she's surrounded by great players. Like you mentioned before too, Sam, this is a team that has been together for a while, and when you have an environment like that, you're only going to get better, which in A'ja Wilson's case is incredible because she's already been one of the best players in the league for a few years now.
Yeah, I agree with you there on all those points, but I will go with Stewie here to win the WNBA MVP this year for a lot of the reasons that you just said. She didn't win it last year. She was averaging 22 points per game out in the Pacific Northwest, but she's going to have one of the best passers in the entire game dishing her the ball this year. No knock on what she was able to do in Seattle last year, but I think that she just is poised for a really breakout year. And you think about all the pieces that they have on this team, a lot of focus going to be away from the basketball. That's where she really makes all her money. So that's where I'm going with MVP. Terrika, who do you got?
Well, since you guys took the first obvious two, let me throw out a little controversy here. I'm going to go with Alyssa Thomas. I think AT is primed for a breakout season. And when you think about the pieces that were left, a lot of people are focusing on the loss of Jonquel Jones, which, I mean, duh. She absolutely was the most talented player on that team. But I think Alyssa Thomas is someone who is called the engine for a reason. She genuinely knows how to spark a team. She is one of the toughest players that I've ever seen. And with Jonquel Jones no longer there, this is really her team, and this is really the season where she can break out and truly take an extended leadership role. Last year in the finals, 2 triple doubles. It had never been done before. 13 points per game. I mean, she's an all-star, 3-time all-star at that. She knows what it means to be a person who silently knows how to get underneath people's skin. And I think if people continue to not really put much stock into Connecticut this year, she will slowly creep up and be an MVP candidate at the end of the season.
Well, it's interesting, too, because we talked about how the East might be a little bit open this year, whereas it wasn't in years past. But with that being said, let's go on to the most improved player this year, Harry. Who do we got here?
I'm going with Aari McDonald from Atlanta. So her first year, a lot of people kind of forget, after we went through that ownership change here in Atlanta, she had 3 coaches in 4 months her first year in the WNBA. That's absurd. And she made statistical leaps in almost every category her second year. I think this third year she can really establish herself as the point guard of the future for this team. A team that has very slowly but surely started to mold itself, have an identity, especially on the defensive end. She can make strides offensively for this team. She's going to be my pick.
Yeah, I want to show some love to the ACC here. I'm going to go Asia Durr. AD Durr had some health issues. We know she struggled with the COVID as well. Had the hip deal last year, was only able to play in 15 games. But in those 15 games, she averaged 11 points per game. I think if she can stay healthy with some of the veterans they have around her, again, she's poised for a breakout year. But the health is obviously the biggest question there for AD. Terrika, who is going to be the most improved player this year? Well,
I know that you guys stuck, pretty south with Atlanta, but I am going to throw out some erroneous names here with Brittney Griner or Elena Delle Donne. Now, stay with me here, people. I know BG has already had MVP caliber season. She already has these trophies to her name. But when you don't play for a season, there's no way that you can do any better than be the most improved from the year before. So I'm trying to stick to the name specifically of improving from one season to another. And I just don't feel like there's any other way you can improve from not playing at all than to being the best one the next year. Same thing with Elena Delle Donne. She has suffered so much with her health over the last couple of seasons. And this year, she came into the season and she's like, I feel the best that I felt since 2019. I am not going to be on minutes restrictions this year. And you know what happened in 2019? The Mystics won a whole darn championship. So if I'm a betting person, I think they could be in the runnings for those categories.
All right. Well, it feels like there's going to be a ton of parity, too, in the WNBA this year. We talked about some super teams, but there's also a couple of teams that might be flying under the radar, teams that we should watch for. Harry, who is a team to watch for in 2023?
So my team to watch for is not a contender. I'm not expecting them to win a bunch of games. But for me, it's the Indiana Fever. This is a team that hasn't won double-digit games in a season in 4 years. This is a team that really has had nowhere to go but up. And you drafted a player that hopefully is going to change the trajectory of your franchise in Aaliyah Boston. You've got somebody in Grace Berger who's going to be a great talent for your team. She's also going to put butts in the seats. You've got some veterans on that team as well. So for me, I'm going to spend a lot of my league pass minutes watching the Indiana Fever because, again, I think that right now you're going to be watching a young team figuring it out, but they're going to surprise you some nights and going to be a really fun team to watch. So if you're a Fever fan, that's kind of a fun place for your team to be as opposed to just bad. They're going to be fun. And even though they're not going to win a lot of games, they will surprise you some nights.
Fair enough. Terrika, team to watch for this year?
Yeah, I'm gonna be a homer for a second, and I'm gonna pick the Connecticut Sun. And the reason that I'm going that way is just simply because I think this team is retooling and not necessarily rebuilding. There's been a lot of conversation about what is going to happen with this team once it was announced that Jonquel Jones was going to the Liberty in free agency. But what people forget is that this is the same team who back in the bubble season in 2020, led by Alyssa Thomas, DeWanna Bonner, and Brianna Jones, were able to get to the semifinals. Now you've added some additional shooting with Ty Harris. You've added, another person to run the ball with her. You also have Tiffany Haynes in that lineup as well. And Beck Allen is going to ball this year for Connecticut. So don't sleep on the team up here in New England, okay? Just keep in mind it's a retool, not a rebuild.
All right, I'm going with Atlanta this year. We're showing a lot of love down south right now, but they had a great draft, and I think if they can have somebody step up in the post, which was a big problem for them in the past couple of years, they had a good draft. Jones coming in from Stanford as well. Ryan Howard, we know what she did last year. Again, they just need somebody, I feel like, to be a little bit more consistent down in low post. Other than that, I think this team is going to be certainly a team to watch for. All right, to wrap it up, 2023 WNBA champion or the series at least. Who is it going to be, Harry? Might not be a surprise.
I'll give you the champion and the series. I'm sorry?
It might not be a surprise either.
I'm going to go Aces over Liberty. Look, I will say this. I don't think the Liberty being the Eastern champs is something that's such a lock-in that people think. Like, Terrika, you mentioned Elena Deladon earlier. She said that this is the first time she hasn't had to rehab in an offseason in years and she was just able to train. So Washington's going to be up there, but I'm going Aces over Liberty.
Terrika, who do we got?
I'm going Aces over someone.
Fair enough.
I don't know.
We don't know. Aces over
Bold.
somebody. That's all we're going with. I'm going to go Liberty over Aces for the reasons we've all talked about this entire show. We've got 2 super teams in the WNBA. They have to meet in the finals. So that's what we're going with. And with that, we are out of time. For Harry Lyles Jr., Terrika Foster-Brasby, I'm Sam Ravech. Thanks again for watching WNBA Hoop Streams presented by Google. Enjoy the games, everybody. We'll see you down the road.